From VOA Learning English, this is Economics. Venezuela is facing a number of economic problems. Inflation is putting pressure on many businesses. Ratson Villaban owns a gift store, but his business needs American dollars to import products made in China. He is unable to exchange Venezuelan money for dollars at the official exchange rate of about 6.5 bolivares to the dollar. He says the supply of dollars is even limited on the black market, where dollars cost much more. He says that is why business at his store is down. Venezuela has the highest rate of inflation in South America. In February, Venezuela reduced the value of its currency by 1/3, which has made imports more costly. The economic troubles have resulted in shortages of products, from necessities like food to beauty products. Venezuela is a major oil exporter. The nation's oil wealth paid for many social programs during the 14-year rule of former President Hugo Chavez. But Venezuela's recent presidential election showed there are divisions in the country. Nicolás Maduro was declared the winner of a close election over opposition candidate Enrique Capriles on April 14th. Mr. Capriles disputed the vote and called for a recount. Enrique Capriles is a lawyer. He promised to open the economy to foreign investment. Nicolás Maduro is a former union leader. He served as vice president to Mr. Chavez before the president died of cancer last month. Mr. Maduro promised to continue the social policies and programs of Mr. Chavez. For supporters, the election was about saving programs for free housing, health care, and education. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In August, Verizon and Google proposed a plan they say could keep the internet open while supporting investment in high-speed internet service. Verizon has the nation's biggest wireless network, while Google is the biggest internet search engine. The proposal was a surprise because the two companies have been on opposite sides of the debate over net neutrality. That is the idea that all content on the web should be treated equally. Internet service providers want to be able to charge more for heavy internet traffic or users who want special services. The Federal Communications Commission regulates telephone, cable, and satellite communications. But its power to regulate internet service has been questioned in the courts. The new proposal calls for rules barring service providers from preventing users from sending and receiving legal information of any kind. Users also could not be prevented from linking any application, service, or device they choose to the web. And broadband internet providers would be barred from discriminating against content and would have to be open about their policies. Supporters of net neutrality criticized the proposal for not including wireless providers. Wireless broadband is among the fastest growing parts of the Internet. Others oppose the creation of a two-tiered system on the Internet in which some content gets a fast lane and other content goes slowly. But Daniel Brenner says such a system already exists. Daniel Brenner is a partner at the law firm Hogan Lovells in Washington. He says service providers want to be able to charge more because they build networks out to their customers across the country. Such companies are the so-called last-mile providers. But the Internet is really a network of networks, which exchange traffic all the time and compete with each other. And not all networks reach the last mile to a customer's door. Paul Karopas of Global Crossing says his company wants to make sure agreements between service providers are honored on all networks. That way, a service promised by Global Crossing on its fiber optic network will be extended all the way to a customer's door, even if another company carries the service that last mile. The Verizon-Google proposal offers suggestions for a debate that is not likely to end soon. Daniel Brenner says the FCC needs clearer guidelines from Congress. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. 18 months of conflict in Syria have hurt the country's economy, but parts of the capital, Damascus, feel normal. Prices are higher, but goods are still available. A VOA reporter recently visited Damascus under the guidance of a Syrian government official. She told us that the spice market of Old Damascus is an unusual sight in a country affected by civil war. It is active. People are shopping there. This takes place while Syrian military forces strike nearby towns where rebels have support. One man she met operates a business once owned by his father and grandfather. He sells cumin, dried peppers, pine nuts, and almonds. He told VOA that business is about the same, but prices have gone up. This has affected both his customers and profit. He is thankful, though, that supplies are still arriving at his shop. But he says people are cutting back and mainly buying essential goods. A spokesperson with the Syrian Ministry of Economy and Trade says Western restrictions on Syria have caused problems. International sanctions came following the government's violent reaction to its opponents. But, he says, the government has worked to keep business in the capital thriving. He notes that there is a self-sufficiency to the Syrian economy and that it is very diverse. Syria is, however, seeking help from outside the country. Russia, China, and Venezuela are major trading partners. The spokesman says many of these countries stay focused on business interests and not political matters. But conditions in Syria are important to many other countries. Many thousands of people have been killed in violence across Syria. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. On January 18th, Wikipedia, the online encyclopedia, blacked out its English language website for 24 hours. The move was part of an organized protest against a proposed United States law to fight illegal copying of intellectual property on the Internet. Jay Walsh is head of communications for the Wikimedia Foundation, which operates Wikipedia. He says the legislation is detrimental to the free and open web. It's detrimental to Wikipedia, and we want to make sure that we send a message. The blogging site Boing Boing and social news website Reddit also went black. Eric Martin, the general manager of Reddit, said, "This is a really big deal, and this is something we're going to fight, and this is something we think threatens the entire tech sector." Both Wikipedia and Reddit urged users to contact their congressional representative. Internet search leader Google also protested, although it continued to provide service. The protest was against two bills, the Stop Online Piracy Act, or SOPA, and the Protect Intellectual Property Act, or PIPA. PIPA is the Senate version. SOPA is the version in the House of Representatives. Supporters say the law is needed to fight foreign websites that sell pirated copies of American movies and music. Stephen Tepp is a lawyer with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He says piracy of books, music, movies, and other forms of intellectual property hurt the economy. These rogue sites are hurting American jobs, stealing American jobs, they're harming American consumers, and they have no business being on the Internet. But many online businesses, including blogs, news sites, and search engines, say the law would force them to become censors. David Smith is with the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. He says the proposed law would hurt Wikipedia and other sites that depend on material from users of the sites. He says websites would be required to police all the material they carry. It creates a legal situation in which a complainant can go before a judge and get an order, and it then makes the various internet companies, the internet service providers, responsible for what they're carrying. After the online protests, some lawmakers said they now had doubts about the legislation. The bills appeared unlikely to pass without changes. The Obama administration said it opposes any law that reduces freedom of expression or increases cybersecurity risk. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Laws in the United States and other countries treat a corporation like a person. We talked last week about how this idea developed a long time ago. In the United States, the Constitution protects freedom of speech. The Supreme Court has recognized that this is also true for corporations. But there was still a question about whether corporations could have the same freedom of political speech as real people do. During the 2008 presidential campaign, a nonprofit corporation released a film critical of Hillary Clinton. The group, Citizens United, wanted to make Hillary the Movie available on cable TV. But it did not want to violate a limit on so-called electioneering communication by corporations and unions within 30 days of a primary election. Citizens United took the Federal Election Commission to court to fight the law. In January of this year, the Supreme Court, by the narrowest majority, voted 5-4 to end the ban. The ruling clears the way for corporations and unions to use their own money to support the election or defeat of a candidate. However, they are still barred from directly giving money to candidates. And the court did not consider the question of laws designed to prevent foreign influence in the political process. Since the 1940s, the traditional place for political speech by American unions and companies has been through political action committees. William Van Alstyne is a professor at the William and Mary Law School in Virginia. He says, if the shareholder felt it to their interest, if they wanted to contribute to a political action committee representing the business interest of the company, then they would contribute to the political action committee. Same thing on the labor side. So members of the union might be encouraged to contribute to the PAC. The PAC would then determine how best to use the money, politically speaking, in campaigns for and against candidates, ballot issues, and all the rest. Now, says Professor Van Alstyne, the decision in Citizens United raises new issues. For example, the court will have to rule on whether companies with majority foreign ownership can enjoy the same expanded rights of political speech. President Obama denounced the ruling in his State of the Union speech to Congress in January. In March, Chief Justice John Roberts told law students that anybody can criticize the Supreme Court. But in answer to a question, he said the setting was very troubling. 6 of the 9 justices, including the Chief Justice, were sitting right in front of the President. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. For more business news, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. There has been a lot of talk about the debt ceiling in the United States. The debt ceiling is a legal limit on how much the federal government can borrow. Political disputes over that amount have concerned investors in recent weeks. American lawmakers must negotiate a new debt ceiling every time the federal debt reaches that legal limit. National debt grows when a government spends more money than it has available. Governments offer bonds and other investments to raise money to pay for this spending. In return, the government promises to repay with interest the investors who buy these securities. The financial demands of World War I led American lawmakers to establish a total debt limit. In 1917, Congress agreed that the president could borrow up to a set amount without seeking approval. Congress has agreed to change the debt limit 10 times since 2001. But the major parties may disagree on spending levels or on the need to borrow to pay for government operations. Other nations buy United States Treasury securities because they are considered the safest investment in the world. The partial shutdown of the federal government led to worldwide concern about the safety of these investments. Congress agreed to reopen the government without enforcing the debt ceiling, only one day before borrowing reached the legal limit. Lawmakers agreed to let the president decide what the Treasury Department could borrow through February 7th. Congress must now negotiate a new debt limit and resolve other budgetary issues in order to avoid another crisis. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Persutti.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. There is a place where Christmas lives all year long. It is called Bronner's Christmas Wonderland in Frankenmuth, Michigan. The family-owned business calls itself the world's largest Christmas store. The late Wally Bronner started the business in 1945. Wayne Bronner, Wally's son, is president and chief executive of what is now a multi-million-dollar corporation. He learned the business from an early age. Some of his best memories are traveling to other countries with his father to find new products for the store. Bronner's sells more than 50,000 holiday products from 70 nations. Half of the products cost less than $10. Wayne Bronner says demand for small objects to hang on Christmas trees has expanded over the years. People put more time, effort, and money into decorating their homes with these ornaments, lights, and religious scenes. Bronner's is famous for its nativity scenes, which show the birth of Jesus Christ. Michigan has the nation's highest unemployment rate. Bronner's has been affected by the recession too, but not in reduced sales, Wayne Bronner says. Even though people are spending less, we're having more people visit here. And as a result, we've actually had a sales increase. Bronner's success is also linked to community cooperation and investment. Frankenmuth is a town of 5,000 people in eastern Michigan's farm country. The town was settled by Bavarians in the 1800s. It has kept its traditions alive in buildings and restaurants. Bavarian cultural themes and Bronner's huge store bring 3 million visitors a year. The town is the most popular place for tourists in the state. Bronner's business is aimed at a single day of the year. But that is not too different from other businesses. Wayne Bronner says about half of our business is done in the last quarter of the year, in the last 3 months. And actually, when you contrast that with most retailers, that follows the same pattern. Wayne Bronner says the family's long-term planning and willingness to reinvest profits has grown the company into what it is today. Still, it does not hurt to build a business on a holiday celebrated worldwide. Currently, about 2% of sales are overseas. But Wayne Bronner sees room for growth, especially through the internet. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. On May 18th, Dominique Strauss-Kahn resigned as Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. Mr. Strauss-Kahn was charged with a sexual attack on a cleaning woman at a New York hotel. He said in a resignation letter that he denies the charges with the greatest possible firmness. His fall has especially shocked Europe. The IMF is currently playing a major part in rescue loans to Greece, Ireland, and Portugal. European nations have increasingly depended on the fund to help them in their recent struggles with debt. The IMF and the World Bank grew out of an international conference held in the United States in 1944. They were created as ways to support economic cooperation and development. Both are based in Washington. The World Bank has traditionally been led by an American, and the IMF by a European. But fast-growing economies in the developing world say it's time for a change. Officials from Brazil, China, and India say Mr. Strauss-Kahn's replacement should come from outside Europe. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, leader of Europe's biggest economy, disagreed. She said, "In the present situation, when we have significant problems with the euro, and the IMF is very much involved there, there should be a European candidate with support from the international community." The main job of the IMF is to help make sure payments flow smoothly between nations. Sometimes this means providing loans so governments can meet debt payments. The money it lends comes mostly from quotas, financial promises made by its members. 187 nations belong to the IMF. The lender currently has about $250 billion in approved loans. Most have not yet been used or drawn down. What effect the resignation of Dominique Strauss-Kahn will have is unclear. He was praised as a skillful negotiator in dealing with Europe and the global financial crisis. But Stephanie Ricard at the London School of Economics says IMF staff members do the actual negotiation of loan conditions. And they're going to continue to do their job. Dominique Strauss-Kahn became managing director in 2007. The Frenchman, widely known as DSK, is a member of France's Socialist Party. Before his arrest, he was considered a leading candidate for France's presidential election next year. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In the American legal system, people generally bring civil claims as individuals. But if a lot of people have similar claims, they may try to bring a class action lawsuit. Cornell University law professor Michael Dorf says a class action allows a large group of people to bring their individual claims together as a group. But groups need permission to bring a class action, and that can be denied. That happened to 1.5 million current and former employees of America's largest private employer. The women accuse Walmart of discriminating against female employees in its stores. But the United States Supreme Court voted to block a huge class action against Walmart in federal court. The women were seeking billions of dollars. They say men were given more pay and more chances to move up in the company. They accuse Walmart of violating part of a federal law, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The case started about 10 years ago. A federal district court in California agreed that the case could go forward as a class action. Walmart again lost in a federal appeals court. But on June 20th, Walmart won its appeal in the nation's highest court. Professor Dorff, who was not involved in the case, says the justices disagreed about whether there was a common question. He says most of the justices found that Walmart was not being accused of one kind of discrimination or one policy, but many different acts. The key to being able to bring a class action here, and the issue that divided our Supreme Court, was whether all of these different claims by over 1 million people had enough in common to justify a single class action. Walmart has a policy barring discrimination, but the women accused the company of unfair policies and permitting bad behavior by some store managers. The court was divided 5-4 in its ruling. Yet all 9 justices agreed that the case could not go forward. The women needed to meet additional legal requirements because they were seeking payment for harm they say was done. All the justices agreed these requirements had not been met. Boston University law professor Michael Harper says the decision was widely expected. He says the class action failed because it did not target a single action or policy by Walmart. But the ruling does not bar the women from bringing individual cases. They can also seek class actions at the state level. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. They are not even 5 millimeters long and cannot fly or jump. Yet bedbugs strike fear in homeowners and business owners. Well, not all business owners. Some see money in these little bloodsuckers. Missy Henriksen speaks for the National Pest Management Association. She says they are now seeing bedbugs in unusual places: schools and hospitals, stores and movie theaters. So, as the numbers have grown, those bedbugs are spreading out and traveling along with people. New York and other cities have outbreaks. But the United States is not the only country affected. Jeff White is an insect expert who hosts Bedbug TV on the website Bedbug Central. He says the lack of public awareness has caused this rapid expansion of bedbug infestations. Mr. White says bedbugs nearly disappeared from the United States for 50 or 60 years. Now, researchers are looking for faster, safer ways to control them without the kinds of poisons used in the past. The name is misleading. Bedbugs do not just live in beds. Mr. White says they can survive for a year without food, that is, blood. In September, an industry event called Bedbug University's North American Summit 2010 took place near Chicago, Illinois. More than 360 people attended the two-day meeting. The industry says bedbugs are the most difficult pest to control. Treatments can cost from several $100s to thousands of dollars in a hotel or apartment building. Missy Henriksen says Americans spent almost $260 million on bedbug treatments last year. That was only 5% of total spending on pest control, but that number does not include other costs. She says the total economic effect is much greater. Businesses that have bedbugs often must close to solve the problem. Bedbugs have not been shown to spread disease, but they can leave itchy bite marks and cause allergic reactions in some people. Lately, however, another bug has caught America's attention. The National Pest Management Association is now getting the most questions about stink bugs. Outbreaks have invaded homes and offices in many states. Stink bugs are harmless except to farms and gardens, and they smell bad only if you smash them. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can get transcripts, MP3s, and podcasts of our shows at voaspecialenglish.com. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and iTunes at VOA Learning English. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. 1 year ago, President Obama signed the Economic Recovery Bill aimed at pulling the country out of recession. The bill promised jobs, including many in the nuclear energy industry. In February, the president announced plans for the government to guarantee more than $8 billion in loans for 2 new nuclear energy centers in the state of Georgia. The Southern Company plans to build the nuclear power centers. The first would start operations in 2016. Mr. Obama announced the plan at a job training center in Lanham, Maryland. The message was that nuclear energy projects will create jobs. President Obama said, "It is a plant that will create thousands of construction jobs in the next few years and some 800 permanent jobs, well-paying permanent jobs in the years to come." In February, the Federal Reserve predicted that unemployment will remain near current levels through the year. The present rate is 9.7%. The central bank said unemployment could remain high for the next 2 years. President Obama has received sharp criticism from Republicans over the lack of progress in job creation. The $787 billion American Recovery and Reinvestment Act is also unpopular because of its cost. Critics said the money is being spent too slowly, with less than 60% being spent so far. But the administration said the measure has saved or created 2 million jobs. By supporting nuclear energy, the president may be seeking common ground with Republicans who have called for building as many as 100 new nuclear power centers. Mr. Obama has linked clean energy with economic growth. He also warned that the United States is falling behind in developing nuclear energy. He said, "There are 56 nuclear reactors under construction in the world, 21 in China alone, 6 in South Korea, and 5 in India." The United States has not built a new nuclear power plant in nearly 30 years. American public opinion about nuclear energy has been mixed. In recent years, public opinion studies show more than half of Americans approve of nuclear energy. About 1/5 of the nation's electricity is generated by nuclear power. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Representatives of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank met in Washington in late April. This was the last time Robert Zoellick attended the spring meetings of the two organizations as the World Bank president. Earlier, Jim Yong Kim was officially chosen as the bank's 12th president. Mr. Zoellick said developing countries are now engines of growth. Developing countries have provided 2/3 of global growth over the past 5 years, he said. But he added that many developing nations still face big problems. He said all members need to work together better for their common interest. The United States traditionally chooses the World Bank head, and Europe chooses the IMF chief. But developing nations want more influence. The World Bank is a development agency. The IMF supports monetary cooperation and provides loans. IMF chief Christine Lagarde announced that the fund had received promises of over $320 billion to help nations in trouble. She also said developing nations need to do more to support their emerging markets. They too have to address some of their issues, she said. They too have to be very attentive to a volatile market situation. And that means for some of these emerging markets, refocusing on their domestic growth. Ms. Lagarde said emerging markets need to work toward growth and building demand. But that requires resources. Two issues are access to banks and safety nets. The World Bank says 3/4 of the poor have no access to banks. That means no savings in their communities to finance growth. The problem is greater for women. Poor women are 28% less likely to have bank accounts than poor men. Social programs are also needed. 60% of the developing world cannot depend on social programs to protect citizens from hunger or to provide services in crises. Mr. Zoellick said, to help the poorest, every country needs basic safety nets to deal with crises. Because the other lesson we learned, he said, is if you wait until a crisis, it's too late. And rich nations have a lot to learn from developing ones. Mr. Zoellick said programs in Brazil and Mexico are not costly, but help millions. Finally, the World Bank Group welcomed its newest member. South Sudan. The nation received its first grant of $9 million. The money is to help create jobs and provide financial services. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
For VOA Learning English, welcome to Economics in Special English. In January, the World Bank released its Global Economic Prospects Report. World Bank experts are using the words fragile and uncertain to describe the economic recovery this year. Their report predicts the global economy will grow a little over 2% in 2013 and slightly more in the following 2 years. Predictions of limited growth have become familiar since the financial crisis 4 years ago. Wealthy countries are expected to have slower growth than developing ones as they deal with larger amounts of debt and big budget deficits. World Bank President Jim Yong Kim is urging developing countries to become growth drivers. But he notes that it is important to build a foundation for growth that can last over time. He says the developed world needs to help developing countries make gains in health, infrastructure, and education. Andrew Burns was lead author of the report. He says it is not only important to build roads and bridges, but to invest money in health care and effort in government reforms. Some high-growth developing countries, such as China, are spending a lot on public works projects, but spend little on health care. The World Bank president says Europe and America have approved some measures to deal with economic weakness. But financial policy remains a work in progress. Still, wealthy nations remain the biggest markets for exports and providers of foreign investment. Developing countries are positioned for stronger growth, but they will face basic risks. World Bank Chief Kim said he is concerned that low grain supplies could bring high food prices, hurting the poor. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. The American economy improved in 2012, but the rate of growth remained low. America's jobless rate fell to its lowest level in 4 years. Average home prices ended a long period of decline, and money started flowing into financial markets again. But at the year's end, many observers said the economic recovery had not been as strong as they had hoped. Like many other countries, the United States is spending more money than it is receiving. Some countries are spending money they do not have in an effort to get their economies growing again. Yet many experts say spending money you don't have, or deficit spending, has caused global financial problems with debt, especially in Europe. Other economists say the mathematics is not that simple. Desmond Lockman of the American Enterprise Institute says that deep budget cuts in Greece have only produced a deep recession. Some see political inaction as a threat. Financial reform activist Robert Bixby says the biggest problem for the American economy is the country's political system. He says political dysfunction is a bigger threat than economic problems. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke says the country does not have to be this way. Recently, he has urged lawmakers to provide leadership. He has called on lawmakers to cooperate and creatively deliver fiscal clarity or a clear path to solving the nation's budget problems. On January 1st, Congress agreed on new tax legislation. The measures took the place of larger tax increases and budget cuts that were to take effect automatically at the beginning of this year. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Today, we share some ideas for job hunters about presenting yourself online. Ben Kirshner is chief executive of a New York company he started in 2004. Elite SEM, or search engine marketing, has about 25 employees. Many companies use headhunters, recruiting services that find workers for high-paying positions. But Mr. Kirshner says that would cost him probably $10,000 to $15,000 to find a $150,000 a year employee. He saves money by advertising jobs online and using social media. Sometimes finding the right person this way can take time. But recently, Mr. Kirshner posted a job on the advertising site Craigslist. He says he had 150 good candidates within 4 hours. He says his company does not use sites that offer to search the web for information about job candidates. His company does that itself. Social networks and other websites can provide a lot of details about people's lives. As Ben Kirshner points out, that may even include personal information that employment laws prevent employers from asking. He says, things we are not legally allowed to ask in an interview, we can find because they're publicly displaying it on the social networks. Leslie Stevenson directs the Career Development Center at the University of Richmond in Virginia. For young job seekers, she says, the barrier between public and private is changing. She says, in the past 2 years, candidates are not seeing social media as a place that we have to keep private from prospective employers, but as a tool that will assist in my search. To do that, job seekers need to carefully develop their online image. Ben Kirshner says an important part of that is managing public and private details on social media. He says you are your brand, so everything you do online reflects who you are personally and professionally. He thinks a willingness to share experiences and skills will lead to a more open workplace. Even the kinds of links you share with other people on Facebook or other sites are part of your image. Image is one thing, but you also need skills. And career specialist Leslie Stevenson says that includes the soft skills that help communicate in the workplace and with potential clients. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can find last week's report about finding a job online at voaspecialenglish.com. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Factory labor built China into the world's third largest economy after the United States and Japan. Now something else is building: labor tensions. China bars labor unions independent of the Communist Party. But George Haley at the University of New Haven in Connecticut says labor unrest is common and is not new. There has been a large amount of action among workers for higher pay. Disputes are especially common in the Pearl River manufacturing area in southeastern China. Companies there have resisted raising wages. For years, millions of Chinese from inland provinces have flooded into eastern industrial centers. But young workers are increasingly dissatisfied with the pay and working conditions. Inflation hurts too. China's export-driven economy has been recovering from the worldwide downturn. The growth rate in the first 3 months of this year was nearly 12%. But China could raise interest rates to control growth and inflation. Prices rose in May at the highest rate in a year and a half. Migrant workers also face added costs for services that were free in the past, like medical care and education. Also, the easy availability of credit has pushed up housing prices. The government does not report on migrant unemployment, but media reports say an estimated 20 million migrant workers returned home last year after losing their jobs. Labor unrest in China takes different forms. Recent strikes against foreign companies have included suppliers for Japanese car makers Honda and Toyota. In Shenzhen, at least 10 employees at factories owned by Taiwan's Foxconn have killed themselves since January. They complained of long hours and low pay. Foxconn makes Apple iPhones and iPads and electronics for other companies. Foxconn has agreed to double basic pay to nearly $300 a month. Foreign-owned companies generally offer the best conditions. Professor Haley says profit for the average Chinese company is less than 5%. The government has tried to get foreign companies to move factories inland, where pay remains low. Some young workers in the South have organized protests using the internet and mobile phones. What remains unclear is how far this can go before the government reacts to it as a threat. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.